hope we'll be able to project them as time goes on. So my name is Manoli. I'm a doctoral student at the Institute of Air and Space Law at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. And I will be speaking about the role of law in space activities and the importance of space legal education for the private space sector. Before I begin, I would like to congratulate the conference organizers for setting up this event so nicely. It's really very important to have this kind of interdisciplinary events that promote space dialogue from any angle you look at it, and it's really difficult to find such kind of events. So before I begin, I'll give that's France, but I'm from Greece. I give a roadmap of my presentation. So first I will start by defining what space law is, why do we need space law, what does it cover, what is the object of space law. I will then move to a short history of space law in order to understand the historical context of it. And then I will give a general overview of the international space law, the 5 UN treaties that we have currently in force, and then what topics are covered by space law and the importance that it has for the private space industry. And then I'm going to focus on the space mining and its legal perspectives. And at the end, I'm just going to give some information about the Institute of Air and Space Law at McGill University. So let me start by explaining what space law is. So each time I meet somebody and I introduce myself and I say I study space law, everybody asks me whether this is something extraterrestrial, something that has to do with aliens. Of course, as you might imagine where I'm going, this does not have to do with aliens. This is not something extraterrestrial. It's just another field of international law, another segment of international law, very interesting and very peculiar. Something that regulates the use and exploration of a very peculiar area, an area that lies beyond the sovereignty of states, which is outer space. It regulates human activity, it regulates the human presence in outer space, as well as human activity on the Earth that has to do with space-related purposes. In order to understand the importance of space law for the multiple space actors, it is important to look a bit back in time to the years that space law was created, and this is the 1960s. So space law was established during the era of Cold War, an era full of political tensions, and the main objective of space law was of the Committee of the Peaceful Use of Outer Space of the United Nations, which was also established at that era, was to basically create laws in order to secure that outer space would not become another battlefield. So space law comprises 5 UN treaties that were established from 1967 until 1979, and since then we do not have the creation of any further multilateral binding instruments. 1979 was the last convention, the agreement, the Moon Agreement. I'm going to talk about it in a bit. Since then we do have the creation of some legal documents, but these are not bindings, they're mostly guidelines or codes of conduct. So the 5 UN space treaties. 1967, we have the establishment of the Outer Space Treaty, and it is important to look at the title of the treaty, Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies. A year later, we have the Rescue Agreement, Rescue and Return Agreement, Agreement on the Rescue of Astronauts, the Return of Astronauts, and the Return of Space Objects launched into outer space. A few years later, we have the Liability Convention, Convention on International Liability for Damage Caused by Space Objects. 3 years later, we have the Registration Convention, Convention of Registration of Objects Launched into Outer Space. And the last one, multilateral legal instrument that we have, is the Moon Agreement, agreement governing the activities of states on the Moon and other celestial bodies. So I'm going to focus on the first, which is the most, the backbone of space law, the most important convention, treaty that we have right now. It was negotiated from 1967 until 1966 until 1967, when it was adopted by the UN General Assembly with a resolution, and it entered into force just 10 months after, October 1967. It has been signed and ratified by 105 states, and it sets out the basic principles of the use and exploration of outer space. The most important of them being the freedom of use and exploration of outer space, the exploration of outer space for the benefit and in the interest of all countries, the non-appropriation and non-sovereignty principle that covers the outer space, the use of celestial bodies only for peaceful purposes, and last, the responsibility of states extending to also to the activities of private space actors. I'm just briefly going to talk about the rescue agreement. It was negotiated during the period of 5 years, and it has a humanitarian nature, and it basically covers the return of astronauts, and it provides that states should take all necessary measures to provide assistance to astronauts in distress, as well as the return of space objects. Then we have the liability convention, negotiated for quite a few years, was adopted by the General Assembly in 1972. It counts 63 member states parties to it, and it provides for 2 different types of liability. One, objective liability, absolute liability for damage caused by space objects of launching states on the Earth or to aircraft in flight, and fault-based liability, subjective liability, when such damage occurs in outer space. A registration convention, very short convention, as the title says, provides for the registration at the international level and national level of space objects. And the Moon Agreement, this is an important agreement, although it has only been signed by 17 states. It is very important. It's the last one. It was being negotiated for 5 years, 1972 until 1979, and it only entered into force in 1984 with 5 signatures. And it is very important because it is the only provision that actually foresees the exploitation of the natural resource of outer space and specifically addresses this issue. It reiterates the provisions of the Outer Space Treaty about non-appropriation of celestial bodies, the non-sovereign nature of outer space. It contains also provisions about the establishment of an international mechanism, an international regime, should the exploitation of celestial bodies become feasible. It also contains the most controversial principle or concept, I would say, about it characterizes the natural resource of the celestial bodies as the common heritage of mankind, and it provides for the equitable sharing of the benefits. And these 2 last provisions are the reason why this convention does not enjoy wide acceptance. But let's go back to the Outer Space Treaty. As we saw from the historical context of the creation of outer space, the principles of space law were established during the Cold War, and they were basically aiming to secure that outer space would not be used for purposes of war. They did, however, include provisions about the scientific use of outer space and the scientific promotion of it, and they did enhance cooperation for scientific purposes, but they did not specifically address commercial issues. We heard earlier that space private science does not have to be commercial, but what happens if it really is commercial? How will the commercial private space sector, for example, space mining private sector, deal with these issues in conformity at the same time with international law? These are basic questions that have no answer so far and constitute the object of discussion for many lawyers and academics. You'll find a lot of lines written on these areas. So what is really the problem? Let's look at Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. According to this article, I repeat, Outer Space Treaty signed by 105 states, outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. So this provision has caused many discussions because of the word national that it contains, and the main of it being that private companies can appropriate parts of outer space through space mining because this word national is over there. However, we have to read it until the end that says or by any other means. So it does not only target into national appropriation, but it includes any other kind. And we'll see it a bit later when we talk about responsibility. So this provision has to be read in coalition together with Article 1 of the Outer Space Treaty that provides for the freedom of use and exploration of outer space in its entirety. And it provides that all areas of celestial bodies shall be free for exploration and use by all states. And there shall be freedom for scientific investigation and similar things. So from what we understand, and keeping in mind that the technological aspect of how space mining can occur, we can see that it's not feasible, it's not logical to not appropriate, by doing space mining, not to appropriate parts of outer space, since space mining entails presupposes the extraction of minerals from the celestial bodies. Why is it important, this, for the private space sector? Because we have Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty. So according to Article 6, states parties to the treaty are responsible not only for the public activities, but also for the activities undertaken by private entities. And this is how private entities are covered by the scope of this convention and its provisions, because the state has to license, has to supervise in such a manner that the private activities stay in conformity with the provisions of this convention. So as we can see, space law is not something that has to do with aliens, neither it is something that only extraterrestrial or something that concerns only the public sector. It does concern also the private space sector, and especially the latter, given that the weight lately of the space activities starts being transferred from the states on the shoulders of the private entities. So all these issues and many more are being discussed in the classrooms of the Institute of Air and Space Law at McGill University. The Institute of Air and Space Law was established in 1951 in Montreal and recently celebrated 65 years. As you can see, if you Google the website, as you can see, the mission of ISL is to educate the next generation of space law academics and professionals, and that's what it's doing. It has graduates from more than 130 countries that occupy key positions around the globe right now, and it offers 3 programs. One, Master in Laws, which presupposes that somebody has a law degree, a certificate that does not require prior legal knowledge, and it's basically designed for space industry practitioners, and the doctorate degree, which I am doing. It goes hand in hand with the Center for Research in Air and Space Law, the main publication of which is the Annals of Air and Space Law that keep being published since 1976. So that was a broad overview of space law and the Institute, and thank you very much for your attention.
So I have a question. So I take a comet, I bring it to Earth orbit, then everybody will mine it? Can you keep it if you brought it here?
I wish it was that simple. No, you can't.
I know. So pretty much there is no incentive to invest in bringing it here, because then everybody will mine it.
So I wish I could answer this question, and we could answer these and similar questions. I think that what we have to keep in mind when we talk about space mining activities is that private space sector is not alone, states are not alone, and the Outer Space Treaty and the whole body of space law is based on cooperation. So that's what we should keep in mind in order to enhance scientific research and the exploitation and exploration of outer space without disregarding the basic principles of space law.
So, questions? Yes?
Again, pursuing this, and I'm not familiar with this, I'm trying to read it in real time. The last lengthy paragraph that you had seemed to resolve the national versus private issue. So now, if I understand that rightly, going back to the first bullet under Article 2, that I'm sorry, it's Article 1, the second article bullet, sorry. The first paragraph under Article 1, I can't read that any other way than this is saying that there is no such thing as private ownership of anything, according to the letter of what's written there. I'm not saying that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I'm reading this as saying if anything is mined, the entire planet gets its share. And forgive me, I think that's a wonderful law, and your rights are only as good as your ability to enforce them. Is there any reality to this, I'm sorry to say?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about space mining and we look at this provision, the only way to make this provision happen without letting down the private space industry would be at benefit sharing mechanisms. Now, how we will do that and how we will implement it, I think it's a big discussion and I don't have the answer to it. Yeah.
How do you square that with the legislation passed by the U.S. Congress last year regarding the same topic?
Okay, I was expecting that question. Well, as I said, this is not an issue that can be resolved unilaterally. We have to cooperate, and that was a unilateral initiative, like it was the draft of Luxembourg that followed a year later. So, in my opinion, it's contrary to what you see right now on the screen, and again, even if we can do it, we have to do it all together. We cannot do it one by one.
Yes?
Reading the second paragraph under Article 1, shall be free for exploration and use by all states without discrimination of any kind. Does that not point to a standard that's somehow similar to the International Space Station, where there would have to be a consortium, and so even if a mine is established, it could be mined and that could be used commercially without discrimination, but all states would have the right to join that consortium,
Yeah.
especially if they can get there.
Yeah, that's a solution that has been proposed, and I think it's pretty feasible. Although it would be an ad hoc solution without being based on an international legislation, it could be a solution. Yeah.
So Apollo astronauts brought back samples of the moon. So pretty much any state on Earth can request a fair fraction of it?
No, there is an exception when it is for scientific purposes. You can extract.
Ah,
Not bad.
Yeah.
So with the Google Lunar X Prize, we're going to have a private entity on the moon.
With?
The Google Lunar X Prize?
Yeah.
I was wondering to what extent that creates a challenge for the current legal framework.
I don't know. I mean, it's pretty clear that we cannot have property. We could exploit the resources, but occupying land, I don't know it's possible and legal. Yeah.
So there was a paper that was released recently, and I think one of the authors might be in the audience, about their quasi or property rights through the precautionary principle, that you can, if you have your telescope, and you can say, no one mess with my telescope, that creates a, you may not call it property, but it's something, right?
Yeah.
So where does that end? Like, how big of an area can I say, this is my place, and not owning it, but you can't come in here because it's my experiment?
Yeah, I would say that talking about property and defining property is a pretty absolute thing. And like one of my professors says, you cannot be half pregnant. You cannot have quasi-property rights. Either you have them or no.
yes?
Yeah.
Has space law started considering the implications of us perhaps identifying even bacterial life forms elsewhere, let alone anything more complex? Is that even a topic of discussion in this area?
In space law?
Yeah.
No, not that I know of. When we talk about extraterrestrial life, we have another area of law which is called meta law, and it's not a part of space law, and it's not that developed.
It's called what law?
Meta law, but it's not space law, and it's not that developed.
Meta law. As in
Yeah.
meta something or other. Okay.
But no, with extraterrestrial life, space law does not have to do, or just scientific research.
Yes, question?
Can you elaborate a little bit more on how one would go about enforcing an international law like this, or what incentives states would have to comply? Because it seems to me that, you know, if the U.S. has a team competing for the
Yeah.
Lunar X Prize,
Yeah.
like Moon Express, they have absolutely no incentive to stop them from going to the moon. I mean, if anything, even if it's a private company, it's going to be a point of pride for whatever state, you know, wins the
Yeah.
prize or gets it regardless of, you know, prize winning capability. And to me, that seems to represent a tremendous problem
Yeah.
in enforcing a law like this.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the problem. We cannot enforce it because the enforcement of all these provisions lie within the domestic laws. It's up to the state to enforce what's written in this convention, and that's very difficult to do and basically to control at the international level. The only way we would go about it would be through international responsibility provisions, and if the state does not supervise in the appropriate manner, then the state would be held liable for the actions of the private space actors. And that's why many people talk about global administrative law and how we should create an entity controlling everything. But that's pretty far-fetched, I
So
think.
what does that liability look like?
It depends. For what actions?
For exactly the proposed example, someone, a private company, perhaps from the U.S., landing on the moon and, you know, performing scientific experiments there.
Yeah, so we could go either through the liability convention, which talks about absolute liability and fault-based liability in outer space, if we consider that these are space objects that cause harm to something that belongs to humankind, or we could go through general international law, which talks about reparations, but it's a pretty vague area. There is no specific answer to that. No, that. Yeah, because we talk about an area that is a non-sovereign area, so it belongs to everybody. It's not that the state harmed another state, that my satellite caused damage to your satellite. It's that a state probably caused damage to something that belongs to the humankind and to nobody at the same time. So it's pretty hard question to answer, yeah.
Did you get the World Trade Organization getting involved in putting together these types of rules?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Because we don't talk about states, we talk about non-sovereign. I think it needs specific legislation addressing specific this peculiar area.
Last question.
Yeah, I was the author referred to there who wrote about quasi-property on the moon, so I absolutely object to the idea that it's like being pregnant. You can own land in Manhattan, but you can't do anything you like with it. There are zoning rules. So basically there's an agreement. Property is not an absolute thing. It's an agreement between you and society that grants you certain rights. So the example I gave was that you could set up this research base on the moon, and you can effectively exclude anyone from coming there because it could cause interference on your instrument, and so they cannot approach, even though you're completely complying with the Outer Space Treaty. Now, effectively, that means they have to make it worth your while to fold up your experiment and go away, right? It doesn't even have to be very good science, it's just my research base.
Yeah.
And you normally think that doesn't matter because the moon is the moon, you can go anywhere, there's plenty of space, but it's not true, because the valuable parts of the moon, both for research and for resource exploitation, are very limited. And the example we used was the so-called peaks of eternal light at the South Pole, also at the North Pole, where you have almost continuous illumination from the sun. The total area of those is about 1 square kilometer, right? It's very long and thin, but the total area is a few football fields. That's a very valuable resource, because it's where you want to generate solar power to do your mining or whatever, or your research, or your moon village. And so if I've occupied those heights with my, however hokey, experiment, you now have to persuade me to leave. So in that sense, you'll have to buy me out. And that's effectively property,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's what we meant.
Yeah, but it will still need to be regulated at the international level, because according to this convention, you cannot appropriate, not even
And yet I
liquidate.
can, according to this convention, because everything we did in that paper was totally according to the Outer Space Treaty.
Yeah.
So we're just pointing out there's a big hole in it. And we didn't find the answer. We agree that there are ethical considerations
Yeah,
involved.
exactly.
But it's a short-term problem.
Yeah.
Because the Chinese have demonstrated the technology and intend to land on the peaks of eternal light in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective. Thank you.
And you didn't think about burial sites and national historic sites. Accidents will happen, and we already have artifacts which are natural historic importance.
Mm-hmm.
You exclude that forever?
Good
So-
question.
Yeah, so thank you very much. This is fascinating. And I think that concludes the conference part of the day, and now we will have fun.
Yes,
Is it?
this is the most important part of any scientific collaboration. We have drinks, we